Our guest today is Jon Medeiros. Jon Medeiros, are you there?
I'm here.
I've looked at your Internet Movie Database file, and you have quite a few credits there. Very impressive. Uh,
Thank you.
Miscellaneous crew credits 23, but that counts multiple TV episodes as one. You're a set production assistant, moved up to a production assistant, then key set production assistant, uh, second assistant director, and even second assistant director, and even second assistant director in 2018. It seems like you're climbing the ladder in the film industry.
Well, I've kind of kept working until someone tells me to stop, and no one has told me to stop so far, so I keep going.
But we don't want you to stop. Tell me about your first film experience. IMDb says Poultrygeist, The Night of the Chicken Dead.
Yeah, so it's actually, I don't know if you're familiar with Trauma. Back in the early 80s, they had a hit with a movie called The Toxic Avenger, which was it was a B movie, and it is what you think it is. And that company stuck around, and they still exist to this day. And in 2005 or 2006, when I was graduating high school, right after I graduated, they were filming a movie in Buffalo, which is where I'm from. And I thought, well, maybe I can be an extra or something. And they were looking for unpaid interns, and I applied to be an intern, and I went to a meeting, a training session, so to speak, and it was very disorganized, and no one ever got back to me. So I just started showing up and doing random things that looked like they needed to be done. And I ended up running all of craft service and catering. And there was no catering company, so I struck deals with a lot of restaurants. And I was this 18-year-old kid running around Buffalo. I met like a purchaser for a country club who donated a bunch of stuff. I met with the owner of this large Italian restaurant who just, for whatever reason, decided to give us a bunch of food for, basically $1 a head. And I ended up doing a lot of other stuff. And, I just kept showing up, and then, it consumed my whole summer. I worked 6.5 days a week for pretty much no money. I think the entire summer, impossibly, they paid me $200 total. I mean, it was very much a labor of love, and it's hard to describe, but only Trauma can pull that sort of following. And that job really led to everything else, my entire career.
It says that you are an uncredited man in the wheelchair in the background of that movie. Is that right?
Yeah. So if you watch Poultrygeist, I'm actually in it in a few spots. It's a zombie movie. The first, I don't remember the order of these appearances, but one of the appearances is I'm in a wheelchair and I get pushed over when someone is running to the bathroom. I'm also, I guess, hypothetically playing a different character, standing in the front of a line, dancing. And at another point, I had a line, a speaking line in the movie, which was, "I can't feel my legs, and it's not because I have polio." But that line was cut, so it remains a non-speaking role. One of my very few cameos. I don't really like appearing in front of the camera.
Hey, looking at your schedule here, then you appeared in something called Buffalo Bushido.
Yeah, so that was Buffalo Bushido was a movie made by a guy in Buffalo named Peter McGinnis, who had gone to my high school about a decade plus before me, and he had made an indie in New Orleans in, I don't know, 2003 maybe, called In for $300K. and he came to speak to my high school English class, and I just stayed in touch with him. And then, it might have been my sophomore year of college. I spent a summer kind of quote unquote interning for him. And it was just me and him developing this movie together and going through casting choices and everything. And then eventually, right as I was going back to college, it got made. So I went back to school late. I skipped the first week, I think, so I could, work on this movie. And then I came back on a weekend when he was filming some more. And the movie ends with Peter McGinnis is the director, the producer, the writer, and the star, and probably enough. And he also, I believe, is on the soundtrack because he's quite a musician. But it ends with him jumping off a bridge, which was the Peace Bridge, which is, I think, the largest bridge that links the U.S. to Canada, which is in Buffalo. And right before that, I'm driving over the bridge and I yell at him to jump. I think my line is "jump, motherfucker," or something like that. And that one made the final cut. So,
a speaking role. So you found a way to stardom.
Yeah.
So you went to college. Where did you go to college, and what did you study?
I went to Bennington College in Vermont, and I studied history and literature. But it's a funny story because, Bennington College, I don't know if you know it, but it's people might recognize the name, like maybe Sarah Lawrence. Bennington College is a very experimental liberal arts school in rural Vermont. And I started taking classes with this professor named Stephen Bach, who wrote one of the best books on filmmaking ever written, and it's called Final Cut, and it's the story of the making of Heaven's Gate. And then it goes into the history of United Artists, because Stephen Bach was an executive at United Artists in the 70s and I think the 80s, and then he was drummed out after Heaven's Gate, which was a huge flop. But he had a kind of whole second career as a professor at Columbia and Bennington. And he taught film classes and he taught literature classes, and everything's very loose at Bennington. So some of the classes bled into history. And he told me, he said, "Look, you've already worked on a movie. You're 18. You don't really need to major in film. It's not going to get you anything. Do what you want to do." And so over the course of 4 years, I took a lot of literature classes with him, and we'd always talk about movies. And, so I had a literature and history degree, and my senior year in the fall, I took like a film, I think it was a screenwriting class with him. And in the spring, I was going to take another screenwriting class with him. And in the spring, we came back from winter break, and he wasn't there, and no one knew anything. And then a couple of weeks later, we found out he had lung cancer and had died. But he, having produced he produced Woody Allen movies, James Bond movies. I felt like his advice was worth taking, so I took his advice and majored in literature and history, and then did whatever the hell I wanted.
Sounds good. Then you started to get involved with more movies. How did you happen to get in? I see Next 3 Days, I Am Number 4, Super 8.
Yeah, so when I was working on Poultrygeist, and this is, to me, the best example of try and say yes as much as you can, I met this guy named Walt, who actually worked kind of under me on that movie. And Walt was from Pittsburgh, and he was a few years older than me. He had, I think, graduated college by that time. And after Poultrygeist, he went on to, be a production assistant on a bunch of movies that people have actually heard of. And when I graduated college, this is another kind of crazy story. I moved to New York City with no job, and I was staying in an apartment that belonged to my then girlfriend's mother's boyfriend, and the boyfriend had moved in with the mom, and he said, hey, they really like me. Hey, you can stay in my studio apartment while I try and sell it. You just have to pay the utilities. So I was trying to get all sorts of, film jobs in New York City and not really getting anywhere. I worked on a phone sex commercial for like $50. I was, a lot of dead ends. And finally, Walt, who I'd been in contact with, called me up and said, hey, do you want to come to Pittsburgh for 1 week to work on a Russell Crowe movie, which was, of course, the next 2 days. But he said, you'll have to obviously put yourself up and get yourself here. And I thought about, and this was on a Wednesday at noon. And he said, let me know in an hour. And you have to be here on Friday at 6 a.m. So I thought about it for about 5 minutes, and my answer was yes. And I did the math, and I was like, I'll probably lose money on this, but this is the most substantial thing that's come my way. So I took a train back to Buffalo, which is where I'm from, got my car, which, I didn't bring my car to New York City, and then drove to Pittsburgh. I think must have been Thursday night. I got there at like 11, and the next morning I was on set for that Russell Crowe movie. 1 week turned into 2 weeks, and then someone quit, and I took their job as a full-time PA. And long story short, Walt continued to be a source of employment for me over the years, and I've worked with him. Not on every job, but I worked with him this past summer on Manhunt. And that was the first time I've actually worked with him in like 6 or 7 years, but he remains a very good friend.
Well, you were a set production assistant. For those people who are just thinking about getting into the film business, tell us what a set production assistant does.
Well, on a kind of large union heavy show like The Next 3 Days or Manhunt or Avengers or anything like that, there's usually at least 4 full-time set PAs, sometimes 5 or 6, and one of them is in charge of the walkie-talkies, which seems absurd until you realize that there could be 200 of them and they're worth $1,000 each, and then there's a bunch of batteries and so on and so forth. And that person's usually also in charge of distributing paperwork and stuff like that. And then there's one that's in charge of the actors. So they're back in what we call base camp, which is where all the trailers are, facilitating getting the actors ready and making sure hair and makeup and wardrobe know what's happening, and facilitating communication between them and set, and keeping the actors happy and so on and so forth. And then the third production assistant would be in charge of the extras, making sure they're getting ready in an efficient manner, giving them things to do often, which is done in conjunction with the ADs, the assistant directors. And then the fourth PA, or, sometimes there's more, but there's also the key PA, which is sort of in charge of all the other PAs. It's sort of a toothless title, so to speak, because often there's no additional pay being the key PA, even though you have a lot more responsibility. And I always say that a key PA is really an assistant director without a DGA card, DGA being the Directors Guild. Because as an AD, when I hire a key PA, I expect them to be able to do most things that I can do. I don't expect them, I don't want them necessarily to do all those things, but I want them to be able to, in case I'm, I have to go to the bathroom, or there's an emergency, and all of these things happen, of course. So that's, and the common thread amongst PAs is that the core component of their job that threads through all of what we call the staff PAs and the additional PAs, which are extra PAs we hire on bigger days, is that they're in charge of keeping the crew quiet, keeping the crew out of the shot, keeping random pedestrians out of the shot, keeping random pedestrians quiet, and stuff like that. And that's a sort of Herculean task because, you know, it's one thing to film in rural Pennsylvania, but I've worked on TV shows where you're filming in the heart of Manhattan, and it's just like going to war with the city every day and losing every day. It's sort of a catch-all non-union position that's fairly low pay in comparison to the people around you. And it's often thankless, but you get a sense of all the components of a film production for sure.
What do you see yourself continuing to be a PA, or do you want to become a director?
Well, I'm an assistant director now, so
Yes, I see that some of them. Sorry.
that's okay. So assistant director usually doesn't lead to being a director because it's more of like a management role. Although I have known a few assistant directors on TV shows that have directed a couple episodes of the TV show they're working on. And like I said earlier, you know, my goal has always been to just keep working until someone tells me to stop. And if someone offered me the chance, if I was working on a TV show for several years and someone asked me to direct an episode, I would of course say yes. It's not a particular goal I'm pursuing. I do have a couple ideas for documentaries that I've vaguely put on the back burner for a few years, but I'm not actively pursuing it. You know, I look at what I'm doing. What I'm doing, you know, is very much a career. So I'm content to continue moving in that arena, I guess.
Sounds good. You've been on a bunch of TV series, The Blacklist, Those Who Kill, Gone, and a whole bunch of movies. What movie did you enjoy doing the most?
If you're asking what I enjoyed working on the most and not like the best thing,
the most fulfilling thing that you worked on?
very much Poltergeist, Attack of the Chicken Dead, or whatever they ended up calling it. I went to the premiere of it in New York City, and it was in a sold-out 600-seat theater, and I sat in the back row, and it was just watching the crowd react to something that I had played a small part in was an emotion that I had never experienced before. A close second would be me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which is a fantastic movie that if you haven't watched it, you should watch it, because it was a very low budget job, and it was I think we shot it in like 23 days. And when we started, we all thought the director was like a little crazy, but you know, we read or at least speaking for myself, I read the script and I was like, wow, this is actually really good. And over the course of 23 days, we gradually bought into the director's vision. And by the end of it, everyone was just working together. And it was such a moving experience that that was my last job in Pittsburgh as a PA. And then I had a couple TV shows I did in New York before I became an assistant director. But I had said to someone a couple years after that I would PA again for that director. It was a great experience.
What kind of differences do you see between working on a movie set versus a television set?
There's a couple sayings I have, and they might be stolen. I don't think. The first is, I don't know if I came up with this or I stole it, and it's working on a TV show is like twice the work with half the reward. And then the other one I say is working on a TV show or working on a movie is like running a marathon. And working on TV shows like running until you die. I hate TV work. It's even when you're working on something good, it's very difficult because you move at such a quick pace. That said, it's usually a longer term of employment, so you make more money, and it's often easier to move up in television. So last summer I worked on this show called Manhunt, which is on, I don't even know what it's on. The first season's on Netflix and was about the Unabomber, and the second season, which is the one I did, is about the bombing of the '96 Olympics. And I started off as, when you become an AD, there's really three or four types of ADs. There's the first assistant director, there's the second assistant director, and then what in the rest of the world is called the third assistant director, but in US it's called the second assistant director. So those are the three regular positions. And then below that you have an additional AD, which is on bigger days when you have a lot of extras, you'll hire an additional AD to help with the extras. But a weird quirk is that, as an additional AD, you make about a little more than half what a second makes. So it's relatively low pay in comparison. It's I wouldn't call it low pay, but in comparison it is. But anyways, so I started off as the additional AD, and then by the end of the job, I was the key second AD, just because TV shows are so chaotic and people come and go and so on and so forth. But it's a lot more work with a lot less resources, because even in what we're calling the golden age of television, where there's all this money in television, it's still less money than on a feature film. So it's just less resources, and having to move around quicker and faster. And the big thing for me as an assistant director is the first and the key second assistant directors on a TV show usually rotate. So what this means is that one set of first and second ADs are prepping while the other set are shooting. The second, which is what I usually work as, is always on set. So there are two first ADs, two second ADs, but one second. So I'm always stuck there while they're either prepping or shooting. So they get a sort of break, in the sense that they're either shooting or they're in an office doing, a little more relaxed environment. I'm always stuck on set. The other advantage they have over me is that they get to go and scout stuff, and I fly blind. So I'll be showing up for a location when we're shooting a TV show, and I'll have never been there before. I have no idea, what resources we need, what unique problems there are with the location. So every day is like jumping out of an airplane.
Well, a lot of people, when they think about going on a TV show or a movie set, they wonder if they would be starstruck by seeing some of these people they've watched their whole lives in the thing. Were you ever starstruck?
I don't think I've ever really shown it, but it's hard to say that I haven't been, because of course, when you're working on a movie and you show up for work and the director is Steven Spielberg, you'd have to be an idiot to not be impressed by that. I mean, who is, you're talking about, sorry, I don't even know how to answer this. So yeah, I drove to Virginia when I was a production assistant to work on Lincoln for 2 weeks. And I remember we were at a stage somewhere in Virginia, and Spielberg came out to play with his kid, and it was like 10 feet from me. And I was just standing there watching Steven Spielberg play with his kid. And then I went to the wrap party, which was also Steven Spielberg's, I think, either 60th birthday party or 65th, I'm not sure. And just walking into this party that was like one of the most extravagant things I've ever seen. Yes, of course I was, I had to be starstruck, working with people like Will Smith. You're watching people that I've been watching on the screen since I was a little kid. I'm 33. I've been watching Will Smith since I can remember, from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to Independence Day to, who knows what else. And directors like Richard Linklater, who are such a part of the culture that, then they show up in Pittsburgh making a movie. It's very exciting to be a part of that.
I see you're on Super 8 with J.J. Abrams.
Yeah, that's another one, yeah.
Perks of Being a Wallflower with Emma Watson.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Reacher with Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise was a weird one because, we're all aware of the Scientology thing, and I had just assumed, I did the second unit for that, so it was mainly stunts, and we didn't get a lot of Tom Cruise, but we got a fair amount of Tom Cruise. And I just assumed that I would not like the guy. I had just assumed that he would be a jerk. And boy, I was wrong. He was so professional. He did so much of his own stunts, and the work ethic the guy has is just unbelievable. I remember the guy, he would work on we worked on second unit. We worked a Wednesday to Sunday schedule, and we worked nights. So it was the weirdest schedule, so we'd show up as the sun was going down, work all night, and go home when the sun came up. My days off are Monday and Tuesday. So I didn't see my friends for 6 or 7 weeks. And Tom Cruise would work with the main unit all day and then drive over, he had a driver, so he'd sleep for 40 minutes or whatever, and then work a night with us. And he did this a few times. And, that sort of drive, at that point, you don't care what a person is like, I mean, that's just impressive.
So what was it, just curiosity that made you show up for the Poultrygeist movie to begin with? Or had you thought about becoming into the in the film business as a high school kid, or what?
Well, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. When I was growing up, I always liked movies, but there was no spark until I remember this very clearly. I was 8 years old. My mom went out of town, and my dad said, "We're going to rent a bunch of movies," and he rented Predator and a kung fu movie, and we watched them, and they were, of course, R-rated movies, and I was 8. And I remember watching Predator, and it just blew my mind. It was just, to me, as an 8-year-old, it was just the craziest thing I'd ever seen. I didn't even know you could do those things in movies. And then after the kung fu movie, we rented Billy Madison, which was on pay-per-view. And I enjoyed Billy Madison, but that was the moment where I was like, wow, movies are great. And through, middle school and high school, I watched everything. And I especially gravitated towards horror movies. And there was a point where I'd watched every horror movie that Blockbuster had, every single one. And, I had watched The Toxic Avenger, which was made by the same company, and a couple of their other movies. And if you've never seen those movies, they're an experience, because they're not just horror movies. They're comedies. They're also, there's a saying that something isn't for everyone. And I've always said trauma isn't for anyone. There's so many people that are just wildly offended by trauma movies, which is sort of the point. And it's just this mishmash of everything. It's like a punk rock movie. And so I had watched a lot of their movies, and I was sort of directionless in high school. I was like an okay, above average student at a pretty hard private school. But it crossed my mind maybe I would go to law school eventually or something like that. I enjoyed writing. There's a lot of areas that interested me, but I saw this opportunity and I said, why not? Let's see what happens. And every time I would get another opportunity to work on a movie, I would say, well, this is surely the last time I will do this. And then people, the first few movies I was essentially working for free. And I mean, there was a point where I slept on a stranger's floor in New York City for 6 or 7 weeks so I could intern on a movie. And eventually I was, when I graduated college, I had worked on 3 or 4, and I graduated in 2009, which was about the worst time to be graduating since the Great Depression. And, movies are relatively recession proof. So I figured, fuck it. Why not?
I don't know what else to ask you at this point. We've talked quite a bit. Is there something you'd like to tell people that about filmmaking or becoming a production assistant or an assistant director or anything like that? Any last words?
Yeah, it's simultaneously way easier than you'd think and way more difficult. It's it takes a lot of people, and being an assistant director, you have to group all these people together and get them working on the same page, and they all have conflicting interests. And I think I hope that people who are listening to this understand how hard we work and how long the hours are. And it all goes towards making a product that entertains people. And even when you work on something really shitty, and I've worked on a lot of things that are really shitty, and I'm not going to name anything in specific, but someone can look me up and they can find something that's really shitty that I worked on. And inevitably there's someone out there that really enjoys it. And I worked on a TV show that, again, I'm not going to name, that I thought was terrible. And the experience was not that great. And inevitably I'll run into people and they'll say, oh, you worked on that show? I love that show, and they will go on for 10 minutes telling me about how much they love that show. And that is it's an incredibly rewarding experience. And it's very rewarding not to have to sit in an office somewhere. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm very lucky that I've made it 33 years of my life not being stuck doing that. So there you go.
Well, thought of another question. What was
Sure.
what was the last thing you worked on, and do you have something lined up next?
Well, right now I don't think anyone has anything lined up next because of obviously COVID-19. I suspect that it'll be at least until the fall before anything in the U.S. is filming again. It just seems like the perfect breeding ground for disease because we spend 14 to 16 hours a day in close proximity to other people. You're sort of encouraged to come to work when you're sick. People treat themselves as irreplaceable, so they'll come to work when they're next to death's door. The last thing I worked on was a movie called The Happiest Season, which is a Christmas movie. It's a romantic comedy about a lesbian couple, a young lesbian couple. It's very much I don't want to say your typical romantic comedy because it's not, but it's your classic story of going home for the holidays and you've got a secret from your family. In this case, the secret is that our lead is in a relationship with a woman. And we filmed that in February, and we filmed it in, I believe, 29 days, which is pretty quick for a movie that that's like a studio picture. That's actually remarkably quick. And we filmed it right as COVID was hitting, and while we were filming it, a bunch of us got really sick, and I mean really sick. I woke up one day feeling like I couldn't walk more than 10 feet without feeling like I was going to pass out. And, I had 103-degree fever, and I went and got tested, or I went to urgent care, and they tested me for the flu, and I tested positive for the flu. But it has crossed my mind once or twice if, maybe that was a false positive and everything. Only because, like I said, the film industry seems like a breeding ground for that, given the amount of travel people do, actors coming in and out of LA and so on and so forth. My boss, who is in his late 60s, so, a little older than me, he got sick right around the time I got sick, and he was sick for like over 2 weeks, and it just ripped through the crew. I mean, I have no reason to suspect it was anything but the flu, but it has crossed my mind. But yeah, that was the last thing I did. And it was a pretty great experience. It was a relatively easy job. I liked the people I worked with. Lots of interesting, lots of pretty well-known actors in that. And so after that, there was a TV show coming to Pittsburgh called Rust that I thought maybe I might work on a little as a day player, which means hired on, as needed on a day-to-day basis. But of course, everything, is kind of in limbo because of this. So I have a couple of rental properties, so I'm working around I'm rewiring one of my properties and working around my house in Pittsburgh. I bought a really old house that needed a lot of work, so I'm gutting the attic and so on and so forth.
We really need to review some of the cultural icons like Green Acres.
It's funny. I have seen a lot of movies, and I try and watch a lot of movies as they come out every year. There was a few years ago where I watched 80 movies that came out that year. And what I do now periodically is I will go to the movies, and I'll go and watch 3 movies in the theaters in a day. And I started doing this in 2014 when I was working on the Blacklist in New York City. I would go to a movie theater, I'd walk in and I'd say, what's the next movie playing? And I'd buy a ticket. And then I'd walk out and I'd look for the next movie playing and I'd buy a ticket. And then I'd do it again. And one time I did this, I actually ended up going to 3 different theaters. And I walked out of the 3rd theater, and my friend, literally as I walked out, my friend and my boss texted me and he said, hey, do you want to come to Williamsburg and see Gone Girl? And we met up. My phone was on 1% and it was sold out. So we went back to his apartment, had some drinks, probably too many drinks, and then went back to a later showing. And having not known anything about the movie, I just thought it was a normal missing persons movie. And it's very much not if you haven't seen it. And, like I said, a few drinks, we're sitting in the front row, and the movie just totally blew me away. And I've done this a bunch of times since, and now that I'm a union member, my union card actually gets me into a lot of theaters for free, so it's become a lot easier to do. Having said that, there are a few things that I have not seen that always blows people away. I'm sure Green Acres is not really on the list that blows people away, but yes, I have not seen Green Acres. I have also not seen any of the Back to the Futures. And until the last couple of years, I had actually not seen any of the Indiana Jones. And until about I think 2 years ago, I'd not seen either of the Ghostbusters movies.
Well, you've got time to see some of those things before you grow up, I guess. Uh, all right, it's been nice talking to you. Thanks for doing the interview.
Yeah, nice talking to you, Ed.
And this isn't going to be part of it anyway, but there's a chance you could have had coronavirus. There's news reports out today that it was circulating back in January in the country.
I saw that. That's what made me think, that maybe it was, because it was so much stronger than other times I've been sick. I mean, it only lasted for me for like 4 or 5 days, and I had a lingering cough. But that one day was just like really bad, I sort of wondered if, I mean, it crossed my mind that like maybe I had a false positive on the flu test. But who knows? But what made me think that maybe it could be a false positive was those reports where they were like, yeah, it was like out there way earlier.
Yeah, I'm staying with my cousin and her husband right now, and both got sick, really sick in the first week of March, and had the 102 temperatures and a bad cough. Didn't have any trouble breathing at the time, which is supposed to have been one of the hallmarks of the thing. But
well, it seems like there's so many hallmarks. Like did you see the thing about the toes?
Yeah, and so looking back on it, I'm thinking, yeah, maybe we did have it back then.
It's just so bizarre because it's like such a catch-all list of symptoms. Like there's just so many things that now they're saying that like young people may have strokes or something, and you're like, holy shit, strokes. There's the thing with the toes, a fever, coughing, and it's just like every day is something new.
Yeah, in New York, they did random testing. It seems like almost 20% of the people they tested positive for the coronavirus.
Yeah, I saw that, and like 15% across the state. My mom, who's still in Buffalo, was saying that they were out at the Wegmans, which I don't know if you know what that is. It's a grocery store chain, doing corona tests. And I have a lot of friends in the film industry, of course, in New York, and I don't know anyone directly in New York with it, but all of my friends in New York know multiple people with it. And, I do have some people that I had known when I was growing up in Buffalo that got it, and they've all recovered, thankfully. But, I do work. For me, the big concern is like, if I got it, I would probably be okay statistically speaking, but I could give it to so many different people, and that's what what would concern me. And like I have a 93-year-old grandmother in Buffalo who is a wonderful person, and the thought of that I could give it to her is terrifying. So
have a nice evening. I'm going to end the meeting now.
Yeah, nice talking to you.